The sirens had long faded into the background of Officer Daniel Harper's life. After 12 years on the Mill Creek Police Force, he had grown accustomed to the ceaseless buzz of dispatch calls, the sharp bark of radios, and the adrenaline surges that came without warning. But nothing could have prepared him for the night when his world would tilt back into a memory he thought he had buried. A night when the rain fell in lazy sheets under the sallow glow of streetlights, and the town felt strangely hollow, as if holding its breath, when Daniel, alone on patrol along the outskirts near the old pine woods, noticed a flash of movement dart across the narrow road, small, quick, and shivering, and instinctively slowed his cruiser, tapping the brakes as the headlights caught a soaked, trembling dog cowering at the edge of the forest. And for a heart-stopping moment, Daniel could have sworn he was looking at Max, his beloved Labrador, who had gone missing nearly 3 years ago, the dog whose disappearance had haunted Daniel through countless sleepless nights, searching fields with a flashlight, stapling flyers to telephone poles, whispering promises into the dark that he would never stop looking, never stop hoping, even when logic and time told him otherwise. And now, staring through the windshield, heart thundering painfully against his ribs, he could see the same deep amber eyes, the same black patch over one ear, the same weary but hopeful tilt of the head that Max had always had when waiting at the door. And without thinking, Daniel was out of the cruiser, voice low and coaxing. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. You're okay." Hands outstretched as he knelt on the cold, wet asphalt, the dog hesitating, muscles taut with fear, before inching forward on trembling legs, soaked through and muddy, but unmistakably familiar. And as Daniel gently looped a spare leash from his belt around the dog's neck, feeling the brittle bones under sodden fur, he noticed the shimmer of a battered tag dangling from the collar. A battered piece of metal he turned over with fingers that trembled harder than the dog, his breath catching in his throat as he read the faint, weather-worn engraving. "Max, if found, please call Officer Daniel Harper, Mill Creek PD." And in that moment, the world collapsed into a dizzying rush of disbelief, joy, and confusion. Because it couldn't be. It just couldn't. Max was gone. Everyone had told him. He'd spent months scouring every shelter and roadside. And yet here, against all odds, was his boy, returned from the void, battered but alive. And Daniel scooped the dog into his arms, uncaring of the mud staining his uniform, the rain soaking them both, whispering, "You're home, Max, you're home." As tears blurred the edges of the world, but just as Daniel turned toward the cruiser, heart soaring with gratitude he could hardly contain, something nagged at the edges of his perception, a slight difference in the tilt of the left ear, a faint white streak along the back leg Max had never had, a hesitation in the way the dog met his gaze, familiar but not entirely, as if searching for recognition himself, and doubts, unwanted and sharp, crept into Daniel's mind even as hope battled to smother them. because the tag was real and the resemblance was undeniable. But was this really Max? Or had fate, in some cruel or miraculous twist, brought him a ghost in the shape of the one he had lost? And as he bundled the dog into the backseat, wrapping him carefully in the spare blanket he kept there, Daniel's mind raced with questions he wasn't ready to face. And as he drove back toward town, one hand steadying the trembling animal, he thought back to the night Max had disappeared, the gate he swore he had locked, the flash of movement through the trees, the frantic hours spent calling, searching, the creeping suspicion that someone had taken him, someone who knew how much Max meant, because the bond between them had always been something special, forged during long patrol nights and quiet moments when words weren't needed. And as the town's lights grew closer, Daniel knew he had to be sure, had to know beyond hope and longing. So he drove not home, but straight to the 24-hour veterinary clinic, where the warm-eyed techs recognized him instantly and hurried him into a room, setting the soaked dog gently on the table as Dr. Patel, who had treated Max since he was a puppy, approached with a scanner. And Daniel's heart hammered as the scanner beeped, paused, and beeped again, before displaying a number on the small screen, a number Daniel knew by heart, etched into his mind from the countless forms he had filled when Max was registered. A perfect match, a perfect confirmation. And yet, as Dr. Patel leaned closer, frowning slightly, she said softly, "There's something else, Daniel. This chip was updated. There are 2 entries, yours and another." And she turned the screen for him to see. And Daniel's breath caught because there, listed just beneath his own contact information, was another owner's name, someone he had never heard of, Maggie Carson, and an address nearly 50 miles away, across the county line, a detail that opened a new well of confusion and fear inside him. And even as Daniel sank into the nearest chair, numb, the dog whined softly, pressing his head against Daniel's knee with a desperate, familiar affection. And Daniel knew, deep down in that part of the soul that recognized bonds beyond logic, that whether this was truly Max or another, this dog was reaching out to him for help, for love, and he would not, could not turn away. And so the next morning, with the early light bleeding soft gold over the hills, Daniel, still in uniform, drove to the address listed in the 2nd registry entry, every mile stretching taut with uncertainty. The dog, whom Daniel had already started calling Max again, riding quietly in the passenger seat, looking out the window with a solemnity that broke Daniel's heart anew. And when he pulled up to a weathered farmhouse surrounded by wild grass and sagging fences, an old woman stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the morning sun, and Daniel's breath caught again, because she called out in a cracked, hopeful voice, "Rusty, Rusty boy, is that you?" And Max, or Rusty, whined, tail thumping weakly, as Daniel got out and approached, the woman hurrying down the steps with surprising speed, tears already streaming down her lined face as she fell to her knees and embraced the dog, murmuring over and over, "My boy, my brave boy." And Daniel, feeling like an intruder, waited awkwardly before gently clearing his throat, explaining who he was, what he had found. And the old woman, Maggie, told a story that made Daniel's heart ache. How she had found Rusty as a stray 2 years ago, half starved and broken, collar missing, no tag, just a faint old scar on his left leg that matched exactly where Max had been injured chasing a suspect years ago. How she had nursed him back to health, registered a second chip entry when no original owner could be traced, and how Rusty had become her companion, her guardian, her only family in a world that had grown too quiet. And as she spoke, Daniel saw the truth unfurling between them like a painful, beautiful tapestry. The dog was his Max, and yet he was also Rusty, belonging to them, both in ways neither could deny. And faced with an impossible choice, Daniel did the only thing he could. He knelt beside them both, scratched behind Max's, Rusty's, ears, and whispered, "You found your way home, buddy. And maybe your home is bigger than just one place." And as the sun climbed higher and the dog pressed against them both, tail wagging harder now, Daniel realized that sometimes the family we lose isn't lost at all, just waiting to find us again, in forms and places we least expect. And though questions remained, doubts lingered, for now, under the brightening sky and the silent promise of second chances, Daniel, Maggie, and the dog who was both Max and Rusty sat together on the porch, where a new story was just beginning. The morning wore on, the mist burning off the fields as the sun climbed higher into the vast blue canvas above, and Daniel found himself sitting longer than he had expected on that weathered porch beside Maggie, with Rusty or Max. He still stumbled over which name to call him, lying contentedly between them, head resting heavily on Daniel's boot, as if the months, years of absence had melted away in an instant. And Maggie, cradling a chipped mug of coffee in her fragile hands, spoke in soft, broken phrases about the loneliness that had settled over her since her husband passed away, about the strange, fateful day she had found Rusty limping along the gravel path near her house, too weak to bark, too tired to flee, about how she had coaxed him inside with bits of leftover chicken, and had wept into his fur that first night, feeling the hole in her heart ease just slightly for the first time in years. And Daniel listened, torn between gratitude and a deep, gnawing ache, because every word she spoke painted a picture of a bond, every bit as deep and true as the one he had lost. And somewhere in the telling, he understood with heavy finality that the dog he loved had lived a whole lifetime in his absence, a lifetime that didn't belong only to him anymore. And as the three of them sat there watching the fields breathe and the world tilt into another ordinary day, Daniel felt the first cautious edge of a question take shape in his mind, a dangerous, hopeful question about what came next, because letting go again, after finding Max, touching his coarse fur and feeling his warmth against his leg, seemed unbearable. Yet so did the idea of tearing him away from the woman who had saved him, and as if sensing the weight of Daniel's heart, Maggie reached out a wrinkled hand to brush lightly against his sleeve and said, almost shyly, "Maybe we could share him, Officer Harper, if you'd want that." And Daniel, whose throat had grown too tight for words, only nodded fiercely, feeling the sting of tears he no longer tried to hide. And so an unlikely plan took root that morning, a delicate thing woven out of second chances and stubborn love. A plan that found Daniel returning to the farmhouse after his shifts ended, sometimes with a bag of treats, sometimes just with his tired body and aching need to be near the dog he had mourned, sometimes bringing old tennis balls that Rusty chased with more enthusiasm than Daniel had dared hope. And the dog, Max to Daniel, Rusty to Maggie, seemed to bloom under the doubled affection, growing stronger, filling out again, his coat gleaming once more under careful hands, his eyes brightening into the familiar mischief that had once defined him. And little by little, Daniel and Maggie formed an unexpected friendship around their shared devotion, swapping stories on the porch, swapping favorite memories of their boy, laughing over the ridiculous ways he tried to fit into too small spaces, crying quietly over the scars they each carried. And in the heart of that tiny farmhouse on the edge of the woods, a new family knitted itself together, clumsy and imperfect, but real as the muddy paw prints Rusty left across Daniel's cruiser seat, as real as the lopsided doghouse Daniel built one afternoon out of scraps, painted bright blue and tucked beside Maggie's porch, where the dog could sun himself and seasons turned while life, as it does, crept steadily forward, bringing small joys and sharp sorrows, a flat tire on a rainy night, a sudden fever that laid Maggie low for a frightening week, the way Rusty Max refused to leave her side, whining mournfully until Daniel came and sat through the long nights with them, bringing soup and silent prayers. And when Maggie recovered, thinner but smiling, Daniel realized with a deep, gut-wrenching clarity how much they all meant to each other now, how the boundaries between grief and hope had blurred into something new, something worth fighting for. And then came the day when Daniel, on patrol near the river where the woods thickened dangerously, heard a frantic barking, sharp and insistent, cutting through the drone of cicadas and summer heat, and instincts sharpened by years of police work sent him crashing through the underbrush toward the sound, heart hammering, weapon drawn out of habit, but lowered when he burst into a clearing and found not a threat, but a tragedy unfolding, a little girl, no more than 6, clinging desperately to a fallen tree as the river's swollen current tugged at her small body, her face twisted in terror. And half a step away on the muddy bank, barking hoarsely, straining against an invisible tether, was Rusty, having somehow slipped his way from Maggie's porch, tracked Daniel's scent across miles, and now, standing sentinel against the rising tide, and Daniel didn't hesitate, didn't think. He charged into the water, muscles screaming against the pull of the river, feeling his boots fill and drag him down, but driven by something deeper than fear, something rooted in every moment he had ever spent with Max, every lesson in loyalty and courage the dog had ever wordlessly taught him. And together they reached the girl, Daniel hauling her into his arms just as the branch she clung to gave way. Rusty wading into the water despite the danger, teeth sinking into Daniel's belt to help pull them both back toward shore. And when they finally collapsed, gasping and shivering, on the muddy bank, Daniel buried his face in Rusty's wet fur and laughed, the sound raw and wild, and the little girl, sobbing but alive, threw her arms around the dog's neck, whispering, "You saved me, doggy, you saved me." And later, as the ambulance whisked her away to be checked, and Daniel, soaked and bruised, stood giving his statement, one of the paramedics ruffled Rusty's ears and said with a grin, "You've got yourself a real hero here, officer." And Daniel, looking down into those bright, stubborn amber eyes, could only nod, overwhelmed by a fierce, swelling pride that seemed almost too big for his chest. And the story of the rescue spread through Mill Creek like wildfire, a beacon in a world too often clouded by darker news. And overnight, Rusty, Max, became a local legend, the hero dog of Mill Creek, with kids lining up at community events to pet him, with the mayor declaring a special Rusty Day at the annual town fair. And even Maggie, who preferred quiet to fanfare, allowed herself a teary smile as she pinned the little medal they gave him onto his collar, though she muttered something about silly politicians under her breath. And through it all, Daniel remained at Maggie's side, part of a family he had never expected, but would never again take for granted. And the seasons continued their slow, relentless march, painting the world in gold and crimson before surrendering to the hush of winter when snow blanketed the fields, and Daniel found himself trudging up Maggie's porch steps one evening with a small box tucked under his arm, heart pounding harder than any high-speed chase ever had. And when Maggie opened the door, Rusty dancing excitedly around her ankles, Daniel knelt clumsily in the snow, presenting the box with a sheepish grin and a murmured, "Figured it was about time." And inside, gleaming quietly under the porch light, were two new tags, one reading Max, the other Rusty, and beneath both, a single line, "Beloved by Maggie Carson and Daniel Harper, forever family." And Maggie, voice thick with unshed tears, nodded and whispered, "Forever." And Rusty, Max, thumped his tail in joyous agreement. And somewhere high above, the first stars began to prick the velvet sky, silent witnesses to a story still unfolding. A story built not from the easy, glittering moments, but from the hard, aching choices, the stubborn hopes, the fierce loves that refused to fade. And as the night settled in around them, wrapping the little house in a quiet, steady peace, Daniel knew, without doubt, that home wasn't a place, or even a single person was this messy, beautiful tangle of broken hearts and healed souls. This dog with two names and one enormous heart. This old woman who had opened her door to a stranger and ended up finding a son. This winding road that had led him not back to the life he lost, but forward into a life he had never even dared dream he could find. And though challenges would surely come, the slow creep of Maggie's age, the inevitable trials of small-town life, the storms and sorrows and inevitable goodbyes that no one can outrun, for now they were together, and that was enough, more than enough. And in the soft, breathless stillness of that snowy night, Daniel bent his head and pressed his forehead against Rusty's, Max's, thick, familiar fur, and made a silent promise that no matter what roads lay ahead, no matter how rough or winding, they would walk them together. A man, a woman, and a dog who was somehow the best parts of them both, bound not by blood, but by something deeper, something everlasting, something that even time itself could not break. The years rolled by, slipping one into another, with the quiet certainty of tides reshaping a familiar shore. And life at the little farmhouse found a steady rhythm, a patchwork of ordinary miracles stitched together by the enduring bond between Daniel, Maggie, and the dog, who had once been two lives apart, but was now simply and completely theirs. Rusty to Maggie in the sun-warmed mornings when she sipped tea on the porch and called him to chase butterflies. Max to Daniel during the long night shifts when the cruiser's headlights cut lonely paths through the mist, and a familiar weight pressed against his side, keeping the darkness at bay. And time, that relentless, silent architect, etched its mark gently but unmistakably upon them all, silvering Maggie's hair until it gleamed like moonlight, slowing her steps with a dignity that spoke of battles fought and wisdom earned. And even Rusty, once a whirlwind of endless energy, now preferred to doze in sunbeams, his muzzle frosting white, his bark softer, but no less insistent when the mailman dared approach the fence. And Daniel, whose own reflection began to show the first hints of age around the eyes, cherished every slow afternoon, every meandering walk through fields rimmed with gold, every night spent listening to Maggie's stories as Rusty lay snoring between them. And though an unspoken understanding grew among them that nothing lasts forever, they lived with a fierce, defiant joy, celebrating each mundane moment as the gift it was. And then one bright spring morning, when the daffodils were just beginning to push their stubborn heads through the thawed earth, Maggie didn't come to the door when Daniel knocked, didn't call out with her usual cheerful, "Come in, dear," and a heavy chill gripped his heart as he pushed the door open and found her sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, a blanket tucked around her knees, her hands resting peacefully atop the worn pages of a book she would never finish. And Rusty, faithful to the end, lay curled at her feet, lifting his head to meet Daniel's eyes with a look so sorrowful, so profound, that words fled him entirely. And for a long moment, he simply knelt there, head bowed against Rusty's fur, letting the grief crash over him in great, heaving waves, because love, real love, was a risk you took knowing that one day it would break you. And yet, he would have chosen it 1,000 times over, and the town mourned with him, gathering in hushed clusters at the small, sun-dappled church where Maggie's life was celebrated in stories and laughter and quiet tears. And when it came time for the final goodbye, Daniel slipped a small, simple note into her hands, tucked alongside a photograph of the three of them, and whispered, "Thank you for everything." And after the last hymn faded into silence, Daniel took Rusty home to the little farmhouse that now felt unbearably large and empty. Every creaking floorboard a memory, every sunbeam a ghost of Maggie's laughter, and for a time, they simply existed, moving through the days in a haze of shared sorrow. Daniel, sitting for hours on the porch, with Rusty's head heavy on his knee, both of them staring into the distance, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of her silhouette against the twilight. And yet, slowly, quietly, life began to seep back in, carried on the breeze that stirred the curtains, on the smell of rain in the fields, on the feel of Rusty's warm breath against Daniel's palm. And Daniel realized that Maggie's gift wasn't something that had ended with her passing. It was alive in every stubborn daffodil, in every creaky step of the porch she had loved, in the worn quilt draped across the couch, and most of all, in the bond he and Rusty shared, stronger now than it had ever been, a living testament to the healing power of second chances. And so he chose, every day, to honor her by living as she had taught him, to love fiercely, to forgive freely, to find beauty even in the cracked and broken places. And one crisp autumn afternoon, Daniel found himself standing before a classroom full of wide-eyed children at Mill Creek Elementary, Rusty at his side in a smart red bandana, sharing their story, not just the rescue by the river, but the rescue of their own hearts. And he watched as the message took root in their young faces, saw the hope it kindled, and knew without a doubt that Maggie's legacy would ripple outward, touching lives she had never even known. And years later, when Rusty's steps grew slower, his naps longer, Daniel carried him gently up the porch steps each evening, whispering old jokes and silly songs, until the day came when Rusty, wrapped in his favorite blanket, laid his head against Daniel's chest, sighed a deep, contented sigh, and slipped away with the sunset, painting the sky in molten gold. And though Daniel's heart shattered anew, he held onto the comfort that Rusty had been loved every single day of his life, had known without question that he was safe, that he was home. And Daniel buried him beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, the same one where Rusty had chased squirrels and dreamed in the sun. And he planted wildflowers over the grave, a riot of color that danced in every breeze, a living celebration rather than a tomb. And afterward, when the loneliness threatened to drown him, Daniel found solace in the memories, Maggie's soft laughter, Rusty's eager bark, the way the porch light had always been left on just in case he came home late, and in the life they had built together, a life rooted in the kind of love that defied loss, that endured beyond death. And as the years stretched on, Daniel became a fixture in Mill Creek, the quiet cop with the soft smile and the faraway eyes, known for his kindness, for the way he always carried treats in his pocket for every dog he met, for the way he always looked toward the horizon with a gentle, unwavering hope. And though he never replaced Rusty, how could he? He opened his home to dogs in need, fostered the lost and the broken, offering them the same fierce love that had once been offered to him. And in the quiet moments, sitting on the porch in the slanting light of evening, Daniel would sometimes feel, rather than see, a presence settle beside him, the warm brush of a familiar muzzle against his hand, the ghost of a wagging tail, and he would smile, lifting his eyes to the stars that blinked into being overhead, the same stars that had once watched over a scared young officer and a scrappy, wounded dog finding their way back to each other under the moon's gentle gaze. And he would whisper into the night, "Good boy, Rusty. Good boy, Max." And somewhere, somehow, he knew they heard him, knew they waited just beyond the veil of sight, tails wagging, hearts open, until the day would come when Daniel's own steps grew slow, when he too would cross that final threshold. And on that day, he knew he would find them waiting, Maggie with her arms wide open, Rusty bounding ahead with joyous barks, the porch light left burning, a beacon calling him home. And until then, he would carry them with him, in every breath, in every heartbeat, living not just for himself, but for the love that had saved him, the love that had taught him that no matter how long the night, no matter how heavy the loss, there is always a new morning waiting, always another story to tell beneath the timeless, forgiving glow of the moon.